And joining us now, Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Douglas, good to see you again, my friend.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So wanted to have you in today to talk about the recent income tax legislation that passed the House and the Senate. Don't know if the governor has signed it yet. Last I checked, it was still awaiting his signature, but all indications are he's expected to sign it.
Yeah, he's been pushing for income tax elimination, income tax cuts for a long time, so I'd be very surprised if he didn't sign this. I mean, this is good news. We're all going to get a tax break. It means that over the next few years, we're going to see the 4% rate eliminated. So basically, if you're a worker in Mississippi, you're not going to pay income tax on your first $18,000. If you're married, it'll be $36,000. That's great news. It's really good. But let's be clear. With the price of everyday items from groceries to gas going up, at last something becomes cheaper. The cost of Mississippi's government is going to be made cheaper. That's wonderful. But this isn't as far as we could have gone. This isn't income tax elimination. This is just a big cut.
Mm-hmm. And I know your organization, as did others, advocated for total elimination of the income tax. And at the end of the day, it just didn't seem like that was in the cards from a political perspective. Couldn't get that plans which did pass the House.
Not yet.
Ran into some difficulty in the Senate.
Yep.
And so they got together over the weekend in conference and hammered out the final plan that we got. Again, does fall short. Do you think I still believe there's a chance to get that done eventually. I don't think we've closed the door on it. I've kind of described this as a down payment on that.
I think that's a very sensible way of describing it. Let's put this in context. At the moment in Mississippi, the legislature is sitting on a mountain of money. There's a $1.2 billion surplus. On top of that, there is a $1.8 billion surplus in terms of the money they've been handed from D.C. for the
rescue
ARPA.
plan.
Yeah,
ARPA.
Add that together, that's $3 billion. They're only spending about a sixth of that. They're only spending a small fraction of that $3 billion, giving taxpayers back their money. The rest is being spent on growing government. I don't think that is something that conservatives should be cheering. Yeah. So I think when people recognize that, I think they're going to have to come back and look again at elimination.
Okay. Where does your organization see that government in Mississippi is growing that you'd like to blunt, that you'd like to kind of put the quietas on?
There's a whole range of organizations, agencies, boards, commissions in downtown Jackson, and you can't do much in Mississippi without their permission. They regulate everything, and each one of these boards has a payroll, and each one of the people on the payroll has all sorts of costs. And we're going through systematically saying, what is it about the administrative state in Jackson, not the administrative state in D.C., the administrative state here in Jackson, that we could do without? Surely anyone who runs a business, anyone who runs any kind of business knows that in a downturn you have to look to economize. When was the last time we systematically went through and looked at the administrative state in Mississippi and worked out what departments could we amalgamate, what boards could we live without, what commissions do we not actually need anymore? I think it's overdue that we did that.
I've posed that same question, interestingly enough, Douglas. There just doesn't seem to be an appetite to undertake such an analysis, because it would require detailed examination of every single agency, every single commission, every single board. I mean, down to the org chart object level of spending level. And we just don't seem to be able to get that going.
That's where we come in. That's what we're working on right now. An organization like the Mississippi Center for Public Policy exists to do this analysis, to do this work, to make the arguments, and to do the math. Because I think this is an argument that is long overdue. Anyone out there who's run a business during the COVID crisis would have looked at their balance sheet and looked at ways to save money. When was the last time government in Mississippi did that? So we're going to do that for them. We're going to come up with recommendations, and we think we can hack away a lot of this big bloated bureaucracy. Okay.
And I think it's also fair to say that to some degree protectionism is alive and well in the state of Mississippi as well.
Spot the vested interests. We saw one of the most egregious, outrageous examples of this with an attempt to stop cars from being sold by the manufacturer direct to the consumer. Look, this is America, for goodness sake. Why can't you buy a car off whoever you want? The vested interests, the lobbyists, the auto dealership people got in there and they got this bill. This is going to make things more expensive for ordinary Mississippians. Why do we allow our political system to be captured by vested interests? I'll give you another example. Healthcare. We've got some of the worst health outcomes in the United States. The answer is not to throw federal money at it. It really isn't. The answer is to remove the restrictive practices that prevent people from expanding hospitals and healthcare provision. But guess who lobbies to prevent that? We've got to bust open this good old boy system if Mississippi is going to prosper.
Now you're talking about something near and dear to my heart. The certificate of need laws, I feel like I've been crusading to tear those down for over a decade. So we just don't ever get any traction. Every year it comes up, gets killed.
Yeah. To put it really simply to some of your listeners wondering what certificate of need is, imagine if a pizza chain had to get permission from Pizza Hut to open a new restaurant. You would say, hang on, that's ridiculous. That's what it's like with healthcare in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. You need the permission of your competitors to expand. So guess what? You don't expand. Yeah. So guess what? Healthcare costs go up. Poor Mississippians have to go without. Then you get this absurd argument saying, hey, let's throw federal dollars to make healthcare more affordable. No. Let's remove these good old boy restrictions that are causing the problem in the first place.
Yeah, it's and honestly, removing the con laws is really a supply side economic approach.
It's
all that is.
It's basic stuff. I mean, partly it's the failure of organizations like ours over the years to explain how these complicated technical regulations are basically a con against the public. And I think we're starting to make progress because we're explaining to tens of thousands of Mississippians that they are being ripped off by a collusion between vested parasitic interests and the political process. We need to break it open. I hope that we will get actual free market conservative candidates in either party, Democrat or Republican, who are prepared to actually take on some of these vested interests. Because with the cost of living being such a problem, I think they could outline practical steps they could take to actually make the cost of healthcare more affordable.
And that health care as an expense, as a household expense, it just continues to rise, continues to consume more disposable dollars. Yep. It's out of control and doesn't seem to be coming down.
We're told we got to look to the federal government for handouts. Look, if federal government handouts fix things, Mississippi would be the richest state in the union. We're not. We're 50th out of 50 because for years we've been led by people who think that the way to make Mississippi rich is to look to congressional appropriations committees. It's not. That's a good way of getting buildings named after politicians. It's not a good way of making Mississippi prosperous.
And we often applaud and praise our congressional delegation on both sides, and we look to them to get in there and make sure we get our fair share, and then we complain because we have deficits and debt. Where do you think that comes from?
Hey, they've just made us welfare dependents on Washington. Why is that seen as a good thing?
And we're, last I checked, 3-to-1 dollars that we receive versus dollars we spend, 50th or top, really first in the nation in that statistic.
It needs repeating. If federal handouts made you rich, we would be the richest state in the United States. In fact, we are the recipients of welfare dependency from D.C. We need a different way. Instead of getting wealth by being handed it by Congress, we need to change the way that Mississippi is run so that wealth can be created here in the first place. It's really possible to do this.
Yeah, and let's be honest, when we say D.C., but it's routed through D.C. from the deep blue states that don't have that ratio, that actually send more than they receive. And so that's just being redistributed through D.C. back to us.
Yeah, and there's been this wave of prosperity that swept the South of America over the past 30 years.
Yeah.
Look at Atlanta. Look at how Nashville is growing. Look at Texas and Florida.
Yeah.
Why isn't Mississippi growing?
We're not participating in that economic explosion.
This protectionist cartel in downtown Jackson, and we need to change it.
Well, it's something that we have certainly been crusading, like I said, on for quite some time. There have been efforts, but what do we got to do, Douglas, to break through the logjam there?
Well, I think Mississippi Center for Public Policy is spearheading the efforts. We've got litigation. We are taking legal cases, particularly on certificate of need, and I think we're making great progress. But arguing the case for change, when you want to achieve real change, if you make principled moral arguments in favor of change, eventually, even the most intransigent lawmaker is going to have to listen.
And I sure hope so, because it just seems to get kind of shunned every single year. You can hang around?
I'd love to.
Yeah, we got Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of Mississippi Center for Public Policy in the Element Well Studios. We'll come right back with Middays. We are back in the Element Wealth Studios with Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of Mississippi Center for Public Policy. So we're just going to have to keep working on these just bad policies, honestly, that I think are preventing Mississippi from achieving its potential.
Yep.
And the Certificate of Need laws are maybe, and I say it almost reluctantly, Douglas, maybe those laws had some merit when they were originally introduced back, I believe, in the early 70s in New York, as I recall. Maybe a little bit. Today, in today's dynamic economy and the way healthcare is so diverse and delivered from so many different outlets, it needs to be more decentralized.
Yeah.
We've been heading in that direction to the extent we can, but these policies honestly prevent that.
Yeah, it's a socialist system that weirdly has managed to survive all the Reagan reforms.
Exactly. It's crazy. So, and then we talked about the unnecessary and somewhat almost frivolous boards. It's not just healthcare. The example you gave with respect to the Pizza Hut analogy, which I thought was great. You want to open up a pizza shop, you got to get permission from your competitor. That exists in other industries as well that have these oversight boards and commissions that essentially require you to, Mama, may I have something from the people that don't want you to have it because you're going to compete with them.
Yeah. Just take a step back, and I see this as an outsider. I'm a Brit, right? America was founded by people who were fed up with a distant king, George III, telling them what they could and couldn't do economically. How can it be in keeping with the American tradition to have a bunch of George III type commissions and boards issuing? George III would approve of this.
Right.
Let's stop running this country as though George III is still in charge. Let's get rid of these boards and commissions and let people do what merchants of Boston did all those years ago. Let people be free to do their own business.
I think the message, and I know you would agree with this, is more voters need to ask these questions of candidates because rarely does that even come up, unfortunately.
Don't be conned by the bumper sticker. Don't just look at the fact that this candidate or that candidate might be into hunting or whatever it is. Ask them these questions.
Yeah.
Do you believe in free markets and freedom and liberty?
I totally agree, and I think, and not to downplay the importance, but we tend to get focused on sort of the high-profile issues of First Amendment, which we should, and Second Amendment. Abortion is another key thing as well. But from an economic perspective and as an approach and an effort to grow and expand our economy and economic opportunity, it's this sort of stuff that's in the way of that's holding us back, which is making us more dependent on the federal government. We should implore our citizens to ask these questions, these hard questions. Where do you stand on con laws? Where do you stand on all these crazy boards and commissions and this protectionist stuff?
Yep, absolutely.
Well, and hopefully that'll happen in the next cycle, and we can start getting people in there. I mean, we have a good group. I'm not saying that at all, but they gotta think more about not just those that are running around the halls of the Capitol in terms of influencing their policy positions and their votes, but folks out there as well.
Yeah. Having been a politician, I think it's fair to say a lot of politicians, they do the right thing, not when they see the light, but when they feel the heat.
Yeah, that's a good point. So just keep that in mind. So what else are you guys focused on at the Center for Public Policy from a policy perspective?
I'd say income tax is a partial win for us. One unequivocal win was critical race theory. We published a report shortly before the legislative session saying this is a dangerous ideology. We need a bill to tackle it, to combat it, and I'm really, really pleased that has now been put on the statute books.
Yeah,
that's great.
And I agree with you. I happened to spend about 3 hours in the House in the gallery there watching the debate on that, and in particular, many in the chamber took to the well there and expressed their concerns about it, and I just felt like, wait, are they talking about the same bill?
Yeah.
Because it was like they were objecting to something that the bill was not doing.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I think credit to Senator McClendon for taking the initiative and introducing this. I think he's done a great job. I think some of those people who are concerned about the bill, if their concerns actually reflected what was in the bill, I'd be the first to oppose the bill.
Agree.
I think it's really important that in a state like Mississippi, we have an honest teaching of the past and a recognition that often we've produced laws and leaders in this state that have fallen far short of the American ideal. We absolutely must teach young Mississippians about the civil rights movement and about the struggle to make true the American promise.
Sure.
But I don't think the bill prevents that at all. On the contrary, I would say this bill is an extension of Martin Luther King's idea that people are defined in the United States on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And that the bill reflects the language of the Civil Rights Act itself.
Totally agree. It possibly was improperly named anti-critical race theory, because you get into all kinds of deep discussions about exactly what critical race theory is. I've actually collected definitions over the last couple of years. There's about 15 of them, depending on who you talk to. But this just cuts through all that and says, look, you just can't say that one person is superior or inferior to another based on their physical immutable characteristics. That's all it says.
Yeah, you can't use public money for teaching kids and compelling them to believe these things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Made total sense to me, and I heard some of the objections saying, what are you talking about? That's not in this bill. Representative Hood was instrumental in that on the House side as well, we should point out.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote to all of the senators who objected, and I offered to meet with them to discuss it, to talk about it. I don't want to be confrontational. I want to build consensus on this because I think America's past is too important to be politicized.
Yeah, and I know your organization's primary focus is on the state of Mississippi and your efforts there. But I just got to ask you this. We've been talking a lot on the program today about this obsession we have in this country in the public sector and the private sector. Now it's gender. It seems like we've kind of transitioned away from race. Not that that's off the table. It's still being debated, and there's lots of efforts there. But there's not a major corporation in this country that doesn't have this gigantic overhead of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're forcing every employee.
It's gone too far, hasn't it? I mean,
it's ridiculous.
I think the fundamental problem is that Americans, they're too nice. Americans want to be nice, and so they sometimes shy away from saying it like it is. I happen to believe that if you have two XX chromosomes, you're female. If you have an XY chromosome, you're male. And it's a matter of biological reality. Perhaps too many Americans don't want to be confrontational, and so they allow a tiny minority of extremist lunatics who defy the facts of biology and the facts of life to impose their agenda. We've reached the point now where a XY chromosome swimmer is
crazy,
calling himself a woman and winning competitions, and we're supposed to regard this as a legitimate, fair contest. It's not. It's ludicrous.
Well, we were just talking about new Title IX regulations that are scheduled to be released from the Department of Education and how that's going to open things up. We got the TSA changing their whole deal, their whole process of security and what they're responsible for, what they're charged with. But you see what's happening down at Disney, and now it's being reported that that's a fraction of the employees. Now there are employees coming out that are saying, no, we're not on board with what our corporate position is.
What we're seeing here, and this is a wake-up call for the majority of people in America, what we're seeing here is the fact, something Lenin, the communist leader, understood many, many years ago. A small determined minority can impose their will on the majority unless the majority is prepared to say no. And America needs to be prepared to say no. No, we are not going to pretend that boys are girls and girls are boys. Yeah. No, we're not going to allow this absurd gender identity politics to define who we are and how we entertain our children. Enough is enough.
I get worried, Douglas, that while we're all obsessing with that and consuming valuable cycles with that, our most ardent foes, our foreign foes, they're trying to figure out the next generation of quantum computing and artificial intelligence and training their people, educating their people. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, if America wants to remain the greatest country on earth, we have to be prepared to look at these identity lunatics and say no.
Completely agree. Douglas, good to see you, and I appreciate you coming in the studios, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, has been our guest on Middays. Stay with us. We got half an hour left. Randy and